its rider was permitted to take peace from the earth so that people should slay one another. And he was given a great sword. When he opened the third seal, I heard the third looked, and behold, a black horse, and its rider had a pair of scales in his hand. And I heard what seemed to be a voice in the midst of the four living creatures saying, a quart of wheat for a denarius, and 3 quarts of barley for a denarius, and do not harm wine. When he opened the fourth seal, I heard the voice of the fourth living creature say, come. And I looked, and behold, a pale horse, and his rider's name was Death, and Hades followed him. And they were given authority over a fourth of sword and famine and pestilence by wild beasts of the earth. May God add a blessing to the reading of his word. Does anybody want to get baptized after that? Right? It's hard. This text is difficult. Keep in mind, this is the Lamb opening the scroll, like what we talked about last week. Only mind that when we read about the 4 horsemen, we're not reading the scroll itself in order to read the scroll. But this is just the effect of what's happening as God gets closer to opening the whole totality of human history, opening the scroll. What the picture you're supposed to get is evil begins to freak out. Why? Because God's judgment, the final things, when Jesus comes back, it's about the abolishment of all evil. And that is a good thing. And so evil knows its days are numbered. And so as the Lamb is opening these scrolls, and you begin, John starts to borrow from the book of Zechariah. And if you read chapters 1 and chapter 6 in that book and do this whole comparative study, you're going to find that they're judging the evil nations that hurt Israel. And so what he's doing right here is he's borrowing from that book and he's writing it in his to tell you he's judging these nations that are hurting the church. And so he's borrowing from context, but what's happening is he's saying that as the scroll gets closer and closer to its totality, as Jesus comes, as it gets sooner and sooner and sooner for Jesus to return, evil freaks out and bad things happen. And there's tribulation and there's difficult things, and evil is in anticipation of its own demise here. And that's why it's freaking out. Its days are numbered. So we have to talk real quick. We're going to break down each one of these horsemen, I promise you. But we got to talk real quick about empires. Empires, just like Egypt, like we talked about just a moment ago, give you the illusion of control and power. Empires are all about control and power. Military control, economic control, food control. Rome was one of these empires. It was the biggest empire at the time. And Revelation was written to the church of the Roman Empire. It's a picture. Sing the song of Miriam. They would talk about these. So there's echoes of Exodus all the way through the entire Bible because it's what the first century church was thinking of. So you remember the story of Pharaoh. He had this mythology of control and power. He was in control of the military, the food production, people and things. And when Pharaoh is in control, he literally puts himself in place of God over his people. But Moses comes in and disassembles Pharaoh's sense of control and power. And the way he does that is by allowing God to move. And by coming in as God's spokesman is really what he does. He throws the staff down and becomes a snake, and he shows that he's the real snake crusher, snake handler. That's a reference back to Genesis chapter 3. But anyways, that God is more powerful than his water supply. God is more powerful than his food supply and production. God is more powerful than his economy. Even toward the very end, Pharaoh couldn't even control the life of his firstborn son. He couldn't even control his own household. So what God is doing in the book of Exodus is showing isn't there for Pharaoh, but is for the Israelites. He'll tell the story over and over and for generations. And we're getting to the fun. To understand the central question of Exodus is to help us find meaning in Revelation. So you have to understand Exodus in order to find meaning in Revelation. Are you all still with me? Okay, good. Okay, so the first one is the central question of Exodus. Will you identify with Pharaoh and his false power or the Passover lamb? That is the center of salvation. You have to remind yourself, what saved the Hebrew people? Oh, it was the lamb that was slain. In Revelation, what stands at the center of the throne